When Jin Chanwook, a 34-year-old syndicate boss controlling Seoul's underground worth $180 million, stepped out of his armored sedan after a bloodless negotiation in Gangnam's tallest tower on a December night, where the temperature had dropped to -12 degrees Celsius. The last thing he expected was to see his own mother, young Minji, 71 years old, collapsed on the snow-covered marble steps of his estate. Leaning against a foreign woman so frail she looked like she'd been assembled from wire and desperation, her red dress torn at the seams, her whole body worn down to something that made Jin's throat tighten in a way no enemy ever had. The wind screamed across the fortress he called home, cutting through designer suits and bulletproof glass like it was all just theater. And there she was, the woman who had whispered prayers over him when he was a boy covered in his father's blood. The matriarch who once commanded rooms full of men twice her size, now shivering uncontrollably, while a black woman, the city had discarded like garbage, took off her own threadbare coat, the only barrier between her skeleton and frostbite, and wrapped it around Minji's trembling shoulders, then positioned her body as a human wall against the knife-sharp cold that could kill in minutes. Jin felt the entire world go silent the moment he started running toward them, his Italian leather shoes slipping on ice, his heart slamming against his ribs in a rhythm he hadn't felt since he was 16 and afraid. Terror, an emotion he'd surgically removed from his psychology a decade ago, wrapped around his lungs and squeezed. He couldn't process why his mother was outside the gates, why every security protocol had failed, who this broken woman cradling her was, but what he was about to discover on these frozen steps wouldn't just shatter everything he thought he knew about the ragged stranger in the red dress. It would also force him, a man who had signed death warrants over breakfast, a man whose name made prosecutors quit their jobs, to confront the humanity he'd convinced himself was a weakness only poor people could afford. To face the truth about what actually matters when all the power and all the blood money turn to ash in your hands. If this story is making you feel something real, hit that like button so stories that matter can reach more people who need to hear them. Share this with someone who believes in second chances, because sometimes one story can crack open a heart that's been locked for years. And subscribe to this channel so you won't miss what happens when a killer has to choose between his empire and his soul. Jin charged forward like gravity had stopped applying to anything except the two women on those steps, his feet barely registering the icy ground, his pulse roaring in his ears loud enough to drown out the blizzard. Behind him, Du-yun and 3 armed guards immediately drew their weapons, the black muzzles trained directly on the foreign woman, holding Minji like she was made of porcelain. Over the howling storm, Du-yun barked an order in Korean, demanding the woman release the matriarch and step back with her hands visible. But the woman didn't flinch. She looked straight down the barrels of 3 guns and said in accented but clear Korean, "If you pull those triggers, she collapses, and on these steps where the temperature stops hearts, she'll be dead from shock before your medical team even unlocks the front door." The muzzles were aimed at her heart, but she didn't blink. Jin threw up a hand, a sharp cutting motion that made the guards lower their weapons immediately. He dropped to his knees on the frozen marble beside his mother, his hands shaking in a way that would have gotten him killed in a room full of rivals as he touched her ice-pale face. Minji stared at him with clouded eyes that held no recognition, no spark of the fierce woman who used to slap sense into him when he was reckless, her cracked lips moving in a whisper that barely carried. "Di-young, why are you so late?" "I've been waiting for you." Every tattoo on his skin felt like a brand of shame. Jin felt like someone had reached into his chest and crushed his heart between industrial machinery. Di-young was his father's name, the name of the man who'd been rotting in an ancestral grave for 12 years now. Du-yun stepped forward, his voice tight with panic as he explained what had happened. The driver had been ex-military with a spotless record, but Minji had been lucid all afternoon, coherent enough that the household staff had relaxed their vigilance. Then, at a red light 3 blocks from the estate, she'd experienced a sudden violent episode. She'd torn open the car door and vanished into the crowded district before the driver could react. They'd been searching for over 90 minutes, every available soldier combing the neighborhood in the blizzard, without finding her until Jin's arrival triggered the security system. He had billions, but he couldn't buy her a single minute of safety. Jin clenched his jaw hard enough to crack teeth, fury rising in his chest like magma, but he forced it down. This wasn't the moment for rage, not when his mother was hypothermic in a stranger's arms. He turned his attention to the foreign woman still holding Minji like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Where did you find her?" he asked in English, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. The woman answered in a voice scraped raw by cold, her lips so purple they looked bruised. She said that about an hour and 20 minutes earlier, she'd been taking shelter in the service alley behind the estate's outer wall when she heard someone crying in Korean. She'd followed the sound and found the elderly woman huddled against the iron fence, sobbing and calling for Di-young, saying she needed to go home because her husband was waiting. She was a skeleton, but she was his mother's shield. "I recognized the symptoms immediately," the woman continued, and Jin caught the shift in her language, the medical precision sliding into her words. "Advanced Alzheimer's or vascular dementia based on the temporal disorientation and episodic memory fragmentation. I tried to get an address, a family contact, but she couldn't remember anything beyond her husband's name." Jin studied her more carefully now, this broken stranger who spoke like she'd been trained in neurology. "Why didn't you call emergency services?" The woman's mouth twisted into something bitter. "I don't have a phone. Haven't had one in 8 months. And even if I did, no one would believe a homeless black woman found clutching an elderly Korean matriarch wearing a coat worth more than most people's annual salary. They'd assume robbery or worse." The secret in the red dress was about to blow the mansion apart. She gestured weakly at Minji. "So I stayed, kept her warm, talked to her about Di-young, about the memories she kept sharing, anything to keep her conscious and calm." Jin looked at his mother, her gray head now resting against the woman's bony shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady, her eyes closed like she'd finally found safety. This stranger was dying by degrees, her body shaking violently, her extremities probably already sliding into frostbite. Yet she refused to abandon Minji to the cold. Jin ran, not to kill but to breathe. "What's your name?" Jin asked, and he barely recognized his own voice. "Janet Morrison." In the distance, the ambulance siren grew louder, cutting through the winter night. Jin pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around Janet's shoulders before she could protest. Du-yun was already calling for additional medical personnel. Jin carefully lifted his mother into his arms, and Janet struggled to stand, her legs buckling twice before she found balance. "Come inside," Jin said. It wasn't a request. Janet shook her head, took one step backward toward the gate. "I need to go." "You'll die out here in the next hour." "I'll manage." Jin's eyes narrowed. There was something in the way she was looking at him now, something that hadn't been there when she was focused on Minji. Not gratitude, something harder. "You saved my mother's life. Let me at least." "I don't want your money," Janet cut him off, and her voice had gone flat, almost dead. Then she glanced down at his exposed throat, at the intricate traditional tattoos that marked him as what he was. Jin watched her face change, watched recognition slide across her features like ice water. Her eyes went from exhausted to something else entirely. Something that looked like understanding and horror mixed together. "I know that symbol," she whispered. The world seemed to hold its breath. The ambulance was pulling through the gate now, its lights painting the snow red and blue. Janet took another step back, and Jin saw it clearly now. The way she was looking at him wasn't fear of a stranger. It was the look of someone who just realized they were standing in front of the architect of their destruction. 3 years ago, Janet said, her voice shaking but not from cold anymore, men with that exact mark on their wrists came to my apartment. They said I owed money I'd never borrowed. They took everything. My teaching credentials, my passport, my daughter. Jin felt the ground shift beneath him. "So no," Janet continued, "I don't want your gratitude or your money or whatever you think this moment means. I stayed because she needed help, not because of you." She turned and started walking toward the gate, her red dress a wound against the white snow. Du-yun moved to stop her, but Jin raised a hand. "Let her go." "Boss, she'll freeze." "I said let her go." Jin watched Janet disappear into the blizzard beyond his gates, still wearing his coat, and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd spent 15 years sealing shut. In his arms, Minji stirred and whispered, "Deyoung, did you see that girl? She has kind eyes. You should help her." The medics were rushing toward them now, but Jin couldn't look away from where Janet had vanished into the storm. Somewhere in his fortress of a home, locked in a vault beneath his office, was a ledger. A book containing every debt his syndicate had ever collected, every soul they'd crushed to extract payment. And if what Janet said was true, her name was written in that book in his own handwriting. Jin stood in the security control room at 4 a.m, watching grainy footage of Janet Morrison stumbling through the blizzard in his coat, and did something he'd never done in his entire career as a syndicate boss. He picked up his phone and made a call that had nothing to do with money, territory, or blood. 20 minutes later, Do-Yun found her collapsed in a subway entrance 6 blocks away, hypothermic but alive, and brought her back to the estate in silence. She woke up in one of the guest suites, screaming. Jin met her fury standing in the doorway with his hands visible, his tattoos covered by a black turtleneck that felt like a costume. "My mother is asking for you," he said quietly. "She won't eat, won't take her medication, keeps calling for the woman who saved her in the snow." Janet sat up in the bed, her eyes wild. "So you kidnapped me. I had you brought to warmth before you died. There's a difference." "Not to me." The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present, but Jin forced himself to stay steady, to not react the way his training demanded. He'd spent the entire night in his office vault, going through the ledger page by page until he found it. Janet Morrison, 3 years ago. A predatory loan she'd never signed for, forged by one of his street-level operators who'd since been promoted for his initiative. The debt had metastasized through fraudulent interest until it consumed everything she owned. What was in the tea? "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Jin said. "I'm asking you to help an old woman who doesn't understand why the only person who showed her kindness disappeared." Janet pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "You don't get to use your mother as leverage." "I'm not. She's upstairs refusing to eat because in her mind, you're still out in the cold and it's her fault." Jin's voice cracked slightly. "Please, 1 meal. Then I'll have Do-Yun take you anywhere you want to go with enough money to start over." "I told you I don't want your money." "Then do it for her, not me." Janet stared at him for a long moment, and Jin saw the exact second she made her decision. Not because of anything he'd said, but because somewhere upstairs, an old woman with a fragmenting mind was suffering. "1 meal," she finally said. "Then I leave." Agreed. Why did Jin hide his tattoos? Janet followed him through hallways that cost more than her entire former life, her borrowed clothes hanging off her frame like she was a child playing dress-up. When they reached Minji's suite, the old woman was sitting by the window staring at nothing, her breakfast tray untouched on the table beside her. But the moment Janet stepped into the room, Minji's clouded eyes focused with a clarity that made Jin's breath catch. "You came back," Minji whispered in Korean. "I thought I dreamed you." Janet crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "I'm here, grandmother, I'm real." Minji touched Janet's face with trembling fingers, as if confirming her solidity. Then she switched to halting English. "You must be hungry, always so thin. We need to feed you properly." "I'm fine, really." "No," Minji's voice carried the steel of the woman she used to be. "You saved me, now you let me save you back." She turned to Jin and spoke in rapid Korean. "She needs soup. Real soup, not this hospital nonsense. The kind your father loved. Go to the kitchen and tell them." "Iamioni," Jin interrupted gently. "The kitchen staff doesn't know how to make that soup anymore." Minji's face crumpled with frustration, and Jin watched her struggle to hold onto the thought slipping away like water. Janet stood quickly and said, "What if I made it? If you tell me how, I can cook it." The fog in Minji's eyes cleared again, sharp and present. "You know how to cook Korean food." "I was a teacher in Seoul for 2 years before." Janet glanced at Jin, something bitter crossing her face. "Before I had to leave, I learned from my students' mothers." Is the ghost of the father watching? Minji smiled, and it was the first genuine expression Jin had seen on her face in months. "Then yes, I'll tell you. Every step. Exactly how Di-young liked it." She started listing ingredients in a mixture of Korean and English, her hands moving in the air as if she were already preparing the meal herself, and Jin felt something tighten in his chest because this was his mother, the real her, surfacing from beneath the dementia like a swimmer gasping for air. Jin led them both to the kitchen, a space usually occupied by a professional chef who looked deeply offended at being dismissed. Minji settled onto a stool at the marble island, wrapped in a thick robe, her eyes tracking Janet's every movement with laser focus. Janet moved through the space with quiet efficiency, finding bowls and knives and cutting boards, while Minji directed her in a steady stream of instructions. "The garlic must be sliced thin, not crushed," Minji said. Di-young always said crushed garlic was for people in a hurry, and food was too important to rush. Janet's hands were steady as she worked. "My grandmother used to say the same thing about her red beans and rice." "Smart woman." Jin stood against the counter, watching this impossible scene unfold. His mother was teaching a woman whose life he'd destroyed how to make his dead father's favorite meal, and both of them seemed to have forgotten he was in the room. He studied the curve of Janet's neck as she bent over the cutting board, the concentration in her movements, and realized she'd been telling the truth. She moved like someone who'd been trained, who'd had a life before his syndicate had hollowed her out. The soup began to simmer, filling the kitchen with scents that Jin hadn't encountered in over a decade. Beef broth and green onions, sesame oil and something else, something he couldn't name but recognized in his bones. Minji breathed it in and closed her eyes. "He's here," she whispered. "Can you feel him? Di-young is here." Janet stirred the pot gently. "What should I add to the tea?" "Ginger root, sliced paper thin, and a little honey. He always took it with honey." Minji's voice was distant now, lost in a memory that was more real to her than the present. "It was our first winter in this house, so cold, even colder than now. The business was young and dangerous, and he came home bleeding from a knife wound he wouldn't let me see. But he sat in the kitchen anyway and asked me to make soup and tea, said as long as we had that, nothing else mattered." Jin felt the words hit him like bullets. He'd heard this story before, years ago when his father was still alive, but hearing it now from his mother's fragmenting mind felt like excavating bones. "He was wrong, of course," Minji continued softly. "Everything else did matter. The violence mattered. The choices mattered. But in that moment, in this kitchen, drinking tea and eating soup, we could pretend we were just a family." The ghost of the father seemed to fill every corner of the room, and Jin wanted to leave, to escape the weight of a legacy he'd inherited without asking. But he was frozen in place, watching Janet pour tea into delicate cups with hands that should have been shaking, but weren't. Janet brought the soup and tea to the island, setting it in front of Minji with careful reverence. The old woman took a sip, and her entire body seemed to soften. "Perfect," she breathed. "Exactly like I remember." She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, and for 15 minutes she was completely lucid. She asked Janet about her life, her family, her dreams in that direct way elderly Korean women have of cutting through pretense. Janet answered carefully, editing out the parts that would bring Jin's crimes into focus, talking instead about her daughter, about teaching literature to middle school students, about the small apartment in Itaewon where she used to watch the sun rise over the Han River. Jin listened to the ghost of a life his people had killed and felt something he'd trained himself never to feel. Shame, deep and corrosive and absolute. Minji finished her meal and reached for Janet's hand. "You'll stay, won't you? You'll come back." Janet's eyes flickered to Jin, hard and assessing. "I don't think that's a good idea, grandmother." "Please," Minji's grip tightened. "I don't have many clear days left. I can feel them slipping away like water. But when you're here, I can hold on a little longer, just a little longer." The secret in the red dress was about to blow the mansion apart, and Jin knew it, could feel it building like pressure behind his sternum. Janet could walk out right now, and he'd have to let her go. That was the agreement. One meal, then freedom. But his mother was looking at this stranger like she was the last rope keeping her from drowning, and Jin realized with cold clarity that he was about to do something unforgivable. "I'll pay you," he said, his voice flat. "Double whatever salary you need. You can live here, help with my mother's care, and I'll clear your debt entirely. Fresh start, clean slate. Janet stood abruptly, the chair scraping against marble. I told you I don't want your money. It's not about money. It's about her. Janet's voice was shaking now. It's about you trying to buy absolution for what you've done. You think if you pay me enough, if you clear some debt in a ledger, it erases the fact that men with your mark on their skin destroyed my entire life. She was breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists. I lost my daughter because of you. Do you understand that? She was 6 years old, and she's been in the system for 3 years because I have no legal status, no money, no proof I'm fit to be a mother. Jin felt each word land like a physical blow. So no, Janet continued, I won't take your blood money and pretend we're even. I won't smile and cook soup and help you feel like less of a monster. Minji was staring between them in confusion, the clarity already fading from her eyes. What's wrong? Why is everyone shouting? Janet's expression crumpled. She knelt beside Minji again and said softly in Korean, Nothing's wrong, grandmother. Everything's fine. I just need to go now. But you'll come back. Janet didn't answer. Jin stepped forward. I can find your daughter. The kitchen went silent except for the quiet simmer of soup on the stove. Janet turned slowly, her face blank with shock. What? Your daughter, tell me her name and I'll have her location by morning. My people can access systems the government can't. Jin's voice was steady, but inside he felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. I can bring her here, reunite you, get your legal status restored, all of it. In exchange for what? Stay with my mother, help her hold on to whatever time she has left. That's all. Janet stared at him, and Jin could see the war happening behind her eyes. The mathematics of impossible choices, the weight of a mother's desperation against the knowledge of who was offering the deal. Finally, she whispered, her name is Sarah Morrison. She was placed in foster care through the Seoul family court on March 17th, 3 years ago. Jin pulled out his phone and texted Dooyeon the information. You'll have an answer by dawn. And if you're lying, then you walk out that door and I never contact you again. Janet looked at Minji, who had drifted into sleep in her chair, her face peaceful for the first time in months. I'm not doing this for you, she said quietly. I know. And I still hate you. I know that too. The ghost of his father seemed to whisper from every shadow in the kitchen, and Jin wondered what Dee-young would think of the son who'd expanded the empire into something unrecognizable, who'd automated the cruelty to the point where he didn't even know the names of the people he destroyed anymore. Outside, the blizzard was finally dying, but inside the kitchen, a different storm was just beginning. Dooyeon arrived at 6 in the morning with a manila folder and an expression Jin had only seen twice before, both times when they'd uncovered betrayal within the organization. He dropped the folder on Jin's desk without ceremony and said in Korean, You need to see this before you make any promises you can't keep. Jin opened it and felt his stomach drop. Sarah Morrison, age 9 now, current location, a group home in Bucheon after cycling through 4 foster placements. The reason for the failed placements was listed in clinical language that barely masked the truth: severe attachment disorder, behavioral issues stemming from trauma, multiple incidents of running away. There were photographs, a little girl with Janet's eyes and an expression that looked like she'd stopped believing in adults entirely. There's more, Dooyeon said quietly. He pulled out a second document, this one from Jin's own syndicate archives. The operator who handled the Morrison case wasn't just running a standard debt scam. He was trafficking, using the loan scheme as a cover to identify vulnerable foreign women, then selling their children into adoption networks for clients who wanted exotic kids. Jin's hands went numb. Tell me you're lying. I wish I was. The man's name was Baek Ho-jin. He ran the Itaewon district loans for 3 years before you promoted him to Gangnam operations for his revenue generation. Dooyeon's voice was carefully neutral, but Jin could hear the judgment underneath. He's been moving approximately 15 children per year through the network. Sarah Morrison was product number 47. Who signed the order? Jin stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds where just hours ago he'd watched Janet walk away into a blizzard. Where is Beek now? Busan, running our southern acquisitions. Bring him here, quietly. Boss. I said bring him here. Jin's voice was ice. And find out where Sarah Morrison is being held. I want options for legal extraction within 24 hours. Doohyun hesitated at the door. Are you sure about this? Getting involved with the woman, with the child, it's complicated. The elders already have questions about last night. If they find out you're dismantling operations to save a target, then they can come ask me directly. Jin turned from the window. How long has this trafficking operation been running? 7 years, maybe longer. 7 years. Jin did the math in his head and felt sick. Over 100 children, maybe more, all bearing his indirect signature, his organizational approval, his willful blindness to how the money was actually being made. He'd built an empire on the principle of plausible deniability, never asking too many questions about methods as long as the revenue kept flowing upward. And now he was staring at the cost. Can he erase the past? After Doohyun left, Jin went down to the vault beneath his office, a temperature-controlled room where he kept the physical records that couldn't be digitized safely. The ledger was exactly where he'd left it hours ago, still open to Janet's page. He traced his finger down the entries. Initial loan, 1500000. Amount she'd actually received, 10. The entire debt had been fabricated, every payment demand adding interest on money that had never existed. But that wasn't what made his hands shake. In the margin, in Beek's handwriting, was a notation. Collateral seized 1 female child, age 6, marketable, premium placement available. Jin had signed off on Beek's quarterly reports without reading the details. He'd glanced at revenue numbers and approved expansion. The blood on these pages might as well have been his own. He heard footsteps on the stairs and closed the ledger quickly. Janet appeared in the doorway, still wearing borrowed clothes, her expression wary. Your man Doohyun said you wanted to see me, that you had news. Jin forced his face into neutrality, though everything inside him was screaming. I located Sarah. She's in Bucheon. Janet's entire body went rigid. Is she okay? She's alive, physically healthy according to records. Jin couldn't bring himself to mention the rest, the failed placements, the trauma responses. I'm working on the legal extraction now. How long? Days, maybe a week. Janet sagged against the doorframe, and for the first time since Jin had met her, she looked like she might cry. Thank you, she whispered. Those 2 words felt like knives. Jin gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit, we need to discuss the arrangement. Janet lowered herself into the seat, her eyes never leaving his face. Jin pulled out a contract he'd had his lawyers draft in the last hour. This is a formal employment agreement. You'll serve as my mother's primary companion and cultural liaison. Salary is 115,000,000 per month, with full medical benefits and housing here at the estate. In exchange, I'll handle all legal matters regarding Sarah's custody, including expedited visa restoration for both of you. That's too much money. It's what the position is worth. Jin slid the contract across the desk. There's also a clause releasing you from all prior debts to this organization, effective immediately. Janet picked up the contract, and Jin watched her eyes move across the text. She read like someone who'd been trained to find traps in language, slow and methodical. When she reached the debt release clause, her finger stopped. This says all debts, real or fabricated, including but not limited to loan obligations and associated penalties. Jin kept his expression neutral. Standard legal language. No, it's not. Janet looked up, her gaze sharp. Fabricated debts aren't standard. That's an admission. What if Janet finds out? Jin held her stare. You told me yourself the debt was fraudulent. I'm simply acknowledging that in legal terms. Who signed the original loan documents? Does it matter? It matters to me. Janet's voice was steady, but Jin could see her hands trembling slightly. Someone forged my signature, used my name, destroyed my life. I want to know who. Jin could lie, should lie. Every instinct screamed at him to redirect, to obscure, to maintain plausible deniability the way he always had. But looking at Janet's face, at the woman who'd saved his mother with nothing to gain, he found he couldn't do it. A man named Ho Jin. He ran loan operations in Itaewon 3 years ago. And where is he now? Busan, for now. Janet's eyes narrowed. What does for now mean? It means I'm handling it. How are you handling it? Her voice had gone cold. Is this where you tell me he'll be disciplined, or dealt with, or whatever euphemism you people use for murder? Jin leaned back in his chair. This is where I tell you that what happens to Ho Jin is syndicate business, and syndicate business doesn't concern you. He does concern me. He's the reason Sarah grew up without a mother. And he'll answer for that. To who? You. Janet stood abruptly. You're not justice, Jin. You're just another criminal deciding which criminals get punished. The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present as Jin remembered his father sitting in this same chair, saying almost exactly the same thing to a younger version of himself. Di-young had believed in personal accountability, in looking men in the eye before passing judgment. Jin had streamlined it, made it efficient, removed the personal element entirely. And that removal had allowed monsters like Beak to flourish. You're right, Jin said quietly. I'm not justice, but I'm what you have. Janet stared at him for a long moment. I want to see the original documents, the loan papers, whatever Beak filed. I want to see exactly what he did. No. Why not? Because the paper trail leads back to me. Because my signature is on the approvals. Because if you see the full scope of what I've built, you'll walk out that door and never come back, and my mother will break apart completely. Because it's not relevant to moving forward, Jin said instead. Beak will be held accountable. Your debt is erased. Sarah will be returned to you. That's all that matters. It's not all that matters to me. The ledger was open. The price was her life. Jin stood and walked to the vault's inner cabinet, pulled out a different folder. This one contained Sarah's current placement records, including photographs from the last 6 months. He handed it to Janet without a word. She opened it with shaking hands, and Jin watched her face transform as she saw her daughter's image. The tears came then, silent and devastating, tracking down her cheeks as she touched the photograph like it was made of glass. She looks so different, Janet whispered. So much older. She's waiting for you. Janet looked up, her face wet but her eyes fierce. If I sign this contract, if I stay here and help your mother, I need you to understand something. This doesn't make us even. This doesn't mean I forgive you or trust you or believe you're somehow being redeemed. I'm doing this for Sarah and for your mother, not for you. I understand. Do you? Janet stood, still clutching the folder. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who thinks buying his way out of guilt is the same as actually changing. And I've seen enough wealthy criminals to know that almost none of you actually change. You just get better at hiding what you are. Jin felt the words land like physical blows, but he didn't flinch. You're probably right. Then why are you doing this? Because my mother asked me once if I was happy, and I realized I don't even remember what that word means anymore. Jin met her eyes. Maybe helping you find your daughter won't change what I am, but maybe it'll help me remember what I could have been. Janet was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the contract and a pen from his desk. I'll sign this on one condition. When Sarah comes here, if she doesn't feel safe, if she asks to leave, you let us go. No strings, no threats, no leveraging your investment. Agreed. She signed the contract with sharp, angry strokes, then dropped the pen. When can I see her? As soon as Do-yeon finalizes the legal extraction. 3 days, maybe 4. I want daily updates. You'll have them. Janet turned to leave, then stopped at the vault door. The man who did this, Beak, what are you really going to do to him? Jin looked at her, and for the first time in years, told someone outside his organization the complete truth. I'm going to make him tell me about every child he trafficked, every family he destroyed, every document he falsified. And then I'm going to dismantle that entire operation, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And then, Then he disappears. Not killed, that would be too quick. But he'll spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what he took from people. Janet's expression was unreadable. You think that makes you better than him? No, I think it makes me responsible for cleaning up what I enabled. She studied his face like she was looking for a lie, then nodded once and left. Jin listened to her footsteps fade up the stairs, then looked down at the signed contract on his desk. Her signature was smaller than he'd expected, cramped and careful, like even on paper she was trying to take up less space than she deserved. He returned to the ledger to the page with her name, picked up a pen and began to write. Not an erasure, that would be dishonest, a coward's revision of history. Instead, he wrote in the margin, debt fabricated, operator Beek Hojin, collateral 1 child, status, active recovery, responsible party Jin Chanwook. His own name looked strange in the column, usually reserved for victims. But if he was going to do this, if he was going to actually try to become something other than what his empire had made him, it needed to start with accountability, with putting his name in the ledger next to the damage. Upstairs, he could hear Minji's voice calling for Janet, the clarity already fading from the morning's lucidity. And Jin realized that the woman he'd hired to save his mother might actually be the one who destroyed him completely. The question was whether he'd let her. Elder Choy arrived unannounced on the 3rd morning, walking through Jin's estate like he owned it, which in some ways he did. The family's true power had always rested with the elders, the council of 5 men who'd built the syndicate from street-level protection rackets into a multi-billion-won empire. Jin might hold the title, might sign the orders, but these men held the legacy, and Choy was their uncrowned king. Jin met him in the formal receiving room, the space where business was conducted with the weight of tradition. Choy wore a traditional navy hanbok, his silver hair swept back, his cane tapping against the marble floor with each measured step. That cane, Jin knew, hit a blade sharp enough to cut through bone. His uncle had used it twice in Jin's presence, both times on men who'd forgotten their place. "Uncle," Jin greeted him in formal Korean, bowing at precisely the correct angle. "I wasn't expecting you." Clearly, Choy settled into the chair across from Jin without being invited. Otherwise, you might have hidden the foreign woman currently living in your dead mother's wing. Jin felt his spine straighten involuntarily. Minji is very much alive. Is she? Choy's eyes were cold. Because the woman I helped raise, the matriarch of this family, would never have allowed a stranger, a black stranger, to occupy her private rooms. What's living upstairs is a ghost wearing your mother's face, and you're enabling her delusions. Janet Morrison is employed as mother's companion. She's helping with. I know exactly who she is. Choy pulled a folder from his jacket and dropped it on the table between them. Janet Morrison, former English teacher, illegal visa status for the last 3 years, and most interesting, a victim of our Itiwan loan operations under Beek Hojin's management. Will Jin betray his blood? Jin kept his expression neutral, but inside his chest, something tightened. You've been investigating my household staff. I've been protecting this family from your sentimentality. Choy leaned forward. Do you have any idea what the other families are saying? That Jin Chanwook has gone soft. That he's keeping his mother's charity case under his roof like some kind of pet project. That he's so distracted by an old woman's illness he can't see the structural damage happening to our organization. The organization is fine. The organization is hemorrhaging respect. Choy's voice was sharp now, cutting. You pulled Beek Hojin from Busan operations 2 days ago, had him brought here for questioning about loan documentation from 3 years ago. Do you understand how that looks? Like you're auditing our own revenue streams to appease a woman who should be grateful we didn't have her deported. Jin forced himself to breathe slowly. Beek was running unauthorized operations, trafficking children through loan networks. That's not revenue, Uncle. That's liability. Choy waved a hand dismissively. Beek was entrepreneurial. He found a secondary market for assets that would otherwise be wasted. Yes, the methods were unrefined, but the profit margins were extraordinary. He stole children. He monetized collateral. Choy's expression didn't change. And if you can't see the difference, you're not fit to run this organization." The hidden blade in the cane seemed to pulse in Jin's peripheral vision, a reminder of how quickly tradition could turn to violence. He'd watched his uncle cut down a lieutenant who'd questioned the elder's authority, had seen the cane's hidden weapon slice through a man's throat before the victim even understood what was happening. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Jin kept his voice level. "I'm not asking." Choy stood, his cane tapping once against the floor. "I'm instructing. The foreign woman leaves this estate by sundown tomorrow. You will provide her with adequate compensation for her time and send her back to whatever hole she crawled out of. This chapter closes, and we return to business." "And if I refuse?" Choy smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Jin had ever seen on his uncle's face. "Then the elders will be forced to intervene, to protect you from yourself, to protect the family legacy your father and I built with our own blood." "My mother needs her." "Your mother needs professional medical care, not emotional manipulation from a woman with a criminal visa status and a vendetta against our operations." Choy moved toward the door, then stopped. "I buried my own son because your father was too merciful with the Young family. Did you know that? 20 years ago, we had a chance to eliminate a rival organization completely, to send a message that would have prevented a decade of territorial warfare. But Young said it was dishonorable to kill a rival's children, so we let them live." The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present, and Jin saw where this was heading, saw the trap closing around him. 6 months later," Choy continued, his voice flat, "those children grown into men ambushed my son's convoy. They cut him apart with knives, Jin, slowly. Left pieces of him in different districts so I'd have to collect my own child like garbage, all because your father believed mercy was a virtue instead of a weakness. The price of a life." Jin had heard this story before, had grown up with it as a cautionary tale about the cost of compassion in their world. But hearing it now, aimed at Janet like a loaded weapon, made him understand what his uncle was really saying. "That won't happen to you," Choy said softly. "I won't let you repeat Young's mistakes, even if I have to protect you from your own bleeding heart." He tapped his cane once more. "Sundown tomorrow. The woman goes or I handle it myself." After his uncle left, Jin sat in the silence of the receiving room and felt the walls closing in. He could hear Janet upstairs reading to his mother, their voices carrying down through the estate's careful acoustics. Minji was laughing at something, a sound he hadn't heard in months, maybe years. Yun appeared in the doorway. "Boss, I need to brief you on the elder Choy situation." "You were listening." "Security protocol. I monitor all meetings with the elders." Yun's face was grim. "He's not bluffing. I've been hearing chatter from the council. They're concerned you're becoming emotionally compromised. There's already talk of an intervention vote." "What kind of intervention?" "The permanent kind. They're discussing whether you need to be replaced, for the good of the organization." Jin felt the words settle into his bones. In syndicate terms, replacement didn't mean retirement. It meant a funeral and a successor chosen by the elders. Probably his cousin Sungmin, Choi's nephew, a man who viewed human life as nothing more than accounting figures. "How long do I have?" "If the woman stays, days, maybe a week before they move." Yun hesitated. "Boss, I have to ask, is she worth dying for?" Jin thought about Janet, about the way she'd used her own body to shield his mother from the cold, about the look in her eyes when she'd signed the contract, that mixture of desperation and defiance, about Sarah Morrison, age 9, waiting in a group home for a mother who'd been destroyed by men following Jin's orders. "It's not about her," Jin said quietly. "It's about what I've become, what we've all become." "Then what are you going to do?" Jin stood and walked to the window overlooking the estate grounds. In the distance, he could see the stairs where he'd first found Janet and his mother, the snow now melted but the memory sharp as broken glass. "I'm going to find out exactly how Deep Beak's trafficking operation goes. Every child, every family, every falsified document. And then I'm going to dismantle it, piece by piece." "The elders will never allow that. You're talking about erasing millions in revenue." Then the elders and I are going to have a problem. Do-yeon was quiet for a long moment. My brother is on Choy's personal security detail. If this goes the way I think it's going, I'll have to choose sides. I know. He's my blood boss. I know that too. Jin turned from the window. I'm not asking you to betray your family. I'm asking you to think about what kind of organization we want to be. One that traffics children for profit, or one that has some kind of moral floor, however low. There's no morality in what we do. There never has been. Maybe, but there's a difference between being criminals and being monsters, and I think we crossed that line without noticing. Upstairs, Minji's laughter cut off abruptly, replaced by confused shouting. Jin heard Janet's voice trying to soothe her, calm and patient even as his mother's dementia pulled her back into chaos. He thought about his uncle's ultimatum, about the blade hidden in that cane, about the choice he was being forced to make. Blood or conscience, legacy or redemption, the woman who saved his mother or the men who made him king. Do-yeon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went pale. Boss, we have a situation. Beak Ho-jin. He's dead. Jin felt the ground shift. What? They're saying suicide, found hanging in the holding cell we put him in. But boss, Do-yeon looked up. My brother was on guard duty last night, and the security footage from that wing has been erased. The hidden blade in the cane suddenly wasn't theoretical anymore. Jin understood immediately what had happened. Choy had sent a message, had eliminated the one person who could testify about the trafficking operation's true scope. And he'd used Do-yeon's own brother to do it, ensuring loyalty through complicity. Where's your brother now? Gone. Disappeared this morning. I think Choy has him secured somewhere until this all shakes out. Jin felt rage and desperation warring in his chest. Without Beak, he had no proof of the trafficking network's extent, no way to expose what the elders had enabled, no leverage except his own position, which was currently hanging by a thread. The elder's cane clicked, a sound that meant death. Get Janet and my mother secured in the East Wing, Jin said quietly. Double the guard, people you trust absolutely, and find out where Choy is keeping your brother. Boss, if we move against the elders. We're not moving against them yet. We're preparing for when they move against us. Jin met Do-yeon's eyes. Because they will, probably tonight. Do-yeon nodded and left. Jin stood alone in the receiving room, listening to his mother's confusion echoing through the halls, and realized he'd already made his choice. Maybe he'd made it the moment he saw Janet holding Minji in the snow. Maybe it had been inevitable from the second he understood that all his power couldn't buy a single moment of genuine mercy. Either way, by tomorrow, he'd either be dead or at war with his own family. The question was whether Janet and Sarah would survive the crossfire. Jin found Janet in the library at midnight, surrounded by books she'd pulled from shelves that hadn't been touched in years. His mother was asleep upstairs, finally calm after hours of agitation, and Janet had apparently decided to explore the estate's forgotten corners. She looked up when he entered, her expression wary, still holding the leather-bound volume she'd been reading. I couldn't sleep, she said, as if he'd asked. Your mother kept calling for your father. Took 3 hours to convince her he wasn't coming home. Jin noticed the title in her hands and felt something catch in his throat. That's my father's poetry collection, first edition Kim Seoul. I know, I taught his work to my students. Janet set the book down gently, reverently. Your father had excellent taste. You taught Korean poetry, to middle schoolers. To anyone who'd listen. Janet stood and moved along the shelves, her fingers trailing across spines. Most people think teaching English in Korea means grammar drills and pronunciation practice. But I always believed if you really want to understand a language, you have to understand its literature first, its soul. The power of a book. Jin watched her move through the library like she belonged there, like she was remembering something precious she'd lost. Tell me about it, your teaching. Janet glanced at him, suspicious. Why? Because my uncle wants you gone by sundown tomorrow, and I'm trying to understand what he's so afraid of. She laughed, but it was a hollow sound. He's not afraid of me. He's afraid you're developing a conscience. She pulled another book from the shelf, this one a collection of Yun Dongju's resistance poetry. I had 63 students my last semester, taught them at a private academy in Itaewon, mostly children of mixed families who didn't quite fit in either culture. Korean enough to be expected to excel, foreign enough to be treated like they'd never belong. Like Sarah. Janet's hand tightened on the book. Yes, like Sarah. She opened to a marked page, and Jin realized someone had written notes in the margins, his father's handwriting. I taught them that poetry was resistance, that every time you put words together in a way that made people feel something true, you were fighting against the world's insistence that you disappear quietly. Jin moved closer, drawn by the passion in her voice. This wasn't the broken woman from the snow. This was someone else entirely, someone the syndicate had tried to erase. What happened to your students when you lost everything? I don't know. Janet's voice cracked slightly. The academy fired me the day after Beek's people took my passport, said I was a legal liability. I tried to contact the parents to explain, but no one wanted to be associated with a foreign teacher under investigation for debt fraud. Within a week, I was invisible. Just another failed transplant Seoul chewed up and spit out. Why did she stay in the snow? Jin thought about the woman he'd found holding his mother, using her body as a shield against the frost. A woman who'd lost everything, who had every reason to let a rich Korean matriarch freeze to death as cosmic justice. But you stayed, in Seoul. Why not leave, go home? Janet turned to face him fully. Because Sarah was somewhere in this city. Because every social worker and government official told me if I left Korea, I'd never get her back. So I stayed. Lived in shelters under bridges, in subway stations. Anywhere I could watch the streets, hoping I'd see her face in a crowd. For 3 years. For as long as it takes. Janet's eyes were fierce now. Do you understand what it's like to be a ghost? To walk past people every day who look through you like you're not even there? I had a doctorate in comparative literature. I spoke 4 languages. I'd published research on diaspora narratives in contemporary Korean fiction. And then one day, I was just trash on the street that people stepped over on their way to work. Jin felt the words like physical blows. He'd created thousands of ghosts, had turned human beings into invisible problems that disappeared from ledgers and collective memory. But he'd never had to hear one of them describe what that erasure actually felt like. The night I found your mother, Janet continued, I'd been awake for 36 hours. I was so cold I'd stopped shivering, which I knew meant I was entering hypothermia. I'd found a service alley behind your estate that blocked some of the wind, and I was trying to decide if I should risk going to a shelter or just let the cold finish what Beek started. The boss's first here. Then I heard crying, Janet said softly. This broken, desperate sound that reminded me of Sarah the night they took her. She cried like that, like the world had ended and she couldn't understand why. So I followed the sound even though I could barely stand, and I found your mother against the fence, calling for a dead man and shaking so hard I thought she'd break apart. Jin listened, barely breathing. And I realized she was a ghost too, Janet whispered. Not dead, but invisible to everyone who was supposed to protect her. Lost inside her own mind with no way out. So I stayed. Not because I'm noble or because I forgive what your people did to me. I stayed because I understood exactly what it felt like to be erased while you're still breathing. Jin felt something hot track down his face and realized with shock that he was crying. Actually crying, something he hadn't done since his father's funeral 12 years ago. He tried to stop, to lock it down the way he'd been trained, but the tears kept coming, silent and devastating. Janet stared at him. Are you? My father used to read to me from that collection. Jin's voice was rough, broken. Every night before bed, even when he came home covered in other people's blood. He'd wash his hands for 20 minutes, put on clean clothes, and sit beside me reading poetry like we were a normal family, like he wasn't a killer. Jin. He told me once that poetry was the only honest thing in our world, that everything else was performance, but a good poem couldn't lie. Jin wiped his face roughly. I stopped reading after he died, told myself it was weak, sentimental, that men like us didn't need beauty, just power. Janet set down the book and moved closer, her expression unreadable. Your uncle thinks I'm the threat, but it's not me, is it? It's what I represent. The human cost you've been avoiding by keeping everything abstract. Yes. And now you're going to have to choose. Your mother and me and some abstract concept of redemption, or the empire that's kept you safe and powerful for your entire adult life. Jin met her eyes. What would you choose? I already chose. 3 years ago in the snow when I could have walked away and saved myself. Janet's voice was steady. I chose to be human instead of safe, and look where it got me. Alive, standing in my library, days away from reuniting with your daughter. Only because you decided you needed to buy absolution. Janet crossed her arms. Don't mistake a guilty conscience for actual change, Jin. You're still the man who enabled Beak. Still the man whose signature is on documents that destroyed hundreds of lives. Crying about it doesn't make you redeemed. The words should have made him angry, but instead Jin felt something like relief. She wasn't going to absolve him, wasn't going to make this easy. If he was going to change, it would have to be real, not performed for an audience of one woman he was trying to impress. Du-Yun told you about Beak, Jin asked. He mentioned there was a complication. Janet's eyes narrowed. What kind of complication? The kind where he's dead, and all evidence of the trafficking network died with him. Janet's face went pale. How convenient for your uncle. Very. Jin moved to the window, looking out at the grounds where armed men were doubling patrols, preparing for whatever was coming. Which means when the elders move against me, and they will, I have no proof of what I'm accusing them of enabling. No leverage except my own moral stance, which in this world is worth exactly nothing. So what are you going to do? Jin turned back to face her. I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm insane, but I need you to listen. Jemt waited, her posture tense. There are 47 children in Buck's documentation that I managed to copy before the servers were wiped. 47 families destroyed over 7 years. I have names, dates, approximate locations where they were trafficked. Jin pulled a flash drive from his pocket. I'm going to find every single one of them, return them to their families if possible. If not, I'm going to ensure they're placed in legitimate care with full financial support for the rest of their lives. That's suicide. Your organization will never allow it. I know. The elders will kill you before you finish even 5 cases. Probably. Jemt stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Why are you telling me this? Because if something happens to me, I need someone who understands what's at stake. Someone who won't let this information disappear into another vault, another cover-up. Jin held out the flash drive. Sarah's case is first on the list. If the elders move against me before Dayan can finalize her legal extraction, you'll need this to prove custody, to show she was taken illegally. Jemt took the drive with shaking hands. You're really going to do this? Start a war with your own family over children you've never met? I'm going to try to be the man my father thought I could be before this world convinced me mercy was weakness. The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present, and Jin saw his father's face in his mind, heard his voice reading poetry about resistance and dignity and the small rebellions that make us human. Jemt slipped the flash drive into her pocket. If you die doing this, I'm not going to remember you as a hero. You understand that. You'll still be the man who enabled monsters for 15 years. I know. But I'll make sure those 47 children know someone tried to make it right. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even approval. But it was acknowledgement, and somehow that meant more. Outside, Jin heard vehicles approaching, saw headlights cutting through the darkness. Dayan burst into the library, his face urgent. Boss, we've got 6 cars coming up the main drive. Elder Chu's personal convoy. They're not scheduled and they're all armed. Jin felt his pulse spike, but kept his voice calm. Get my mother and Jemt to the secure room in the east wing. Lock it from inside and don't open it for anyone except me. Jin, Jemt started. Please, he met her eyes. My uncle's blade has tasted blood tonight. I won't let it taste yours. Jemt grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't die being stupid. Your mother needs you. Sarah needs her case resolved. And maybe, she stopped, seemed to reconsider, Just don't die." Jin nodded once, then watched Dayun escort her out. He could hear his uncle's voice now, echoing through the entrance hall, calling his name with false warmth that promised violence. The ghost of Seoul was about to become very real. And Jin had to decide if he was his father's son or his uncle's successor. Jin had exactly 72 hours between Elder Cho's midnight visit and the annual syndicate gala, the one night each year where Seoul's criminal aristocracy dressed in tuxedos and pretended they were legitimate businessmen instead of architects of human suffering. Traditionally, the gala was neutral ground, a place where territories were respected and bloodshed was postponed in favor of champagne and networking. But Jin knew his uncle well enough to understand that tradition only mattered when it was convenient. "You want me to do what?" Jempt stared at him like he'd suggested she walk into traffic. "Attend the gala as my guest, officially, publicly." Jin stood in the doorway of her room, wearing a black suit that cost more than her former annual salary. "It's the only way to protect you. By parading me in front of every crime lord in Seoul. By making you untouchable." Jin stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "In our world, there are rules. You don't harm a boss's acknowledged family or associates without declaring open war. If I bring you to the gala, introduce you formally, the elders can't touch you without losing face." Jempt sat on the edge of the bed, her expression somewhere between disbelief and rage. "So I'm what exactly? Your companion? Your charity project? What title am I getting on this little announcement?" "Cultural advisor to my mother's household. It's vague enough to be respectable, specific enough to indicate you're under my direct protection." "And what happens when your uncle decides your protection isn't worth respecting?" Jin met her eyes. "Then we'll know exactly where everyone stands, and I can plan accordingly." The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present as Jin remembered his father bringing home a street kid he'd decided to mentor, watching the elders' faces twist with disapproval. Deitzing had simply announced the boy was family now, and the discussion was over. That kid was Dayun, and Jin was betting everything that the same principle still held power. "I don't have anything to wear to a gala," Jempt said finally. "Already handled." Jin gestured to the garment bag hanging on her closet door. "Custom made, conservative enough to not cause a scene, expensive enough to make a statement." Jempt stood and unzipped the bag, revealing a deep emerald silk gown that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire teaching career. She touched the fabric like it might burn her. "This is insane." "This is survival." "No," Jempt turned to face him. "Survival is staying hidden. This is you using me as a chess piece in whatever game you're playing with your family." "You're right," Jin admitted. "But you're already on the board whether you attend or not. At least this way, you have some protection while we finalize Sarah's extraction." The mention of her daughter made Jempt's expression shift. Dayun had reported that morning that the legal paperwork was 90% complete, but they needed 4 more days to navigate the bureaucracy without triggering alerts. 4 days that Jempt had to stay alive and out of Elder Cho's immediate reach. "If I do this," Janet said slowly, "you need to understand something. I'm not going to smile and play pretend. I'm not going to act grateful or diminished. Those people destroyed my life, and if I'm standing in a room with them, they're going to know exactly what I think. I'm counting on it." A beggar in silk. The gala was held at the Shilla Hotel's Grand Ballroom, a space designed to make rich people feel like royalty. Jin arrived with Janet on his arm, and the silence that fell across the entrance was immediate and total. Every head turned, every conversation stopped, and Jin felt the weight of 100 predatory gazes assessing the foreign woman in the emerald gown, who moved like she'd been carved from steel instead of flesh. Janet had refused the stylist's attempts to do anything elaborate with her hair, wearing it natural and pulled back simply. No jewelry except small gold earrings. No makeup beyond what she'd applied herself. She looked simultaneously out of place and absolutely magnetic, a woman who refused to apologize for occupying space she hadn't been invited into. Elder Choy was near the bar, surrounded by his usual court of sycophants, and his face when he saw Janet was a masterpiece of controlled fury. Jin felt his uncle's eyes lock onto him across the room, saw the subtle hand gesture that meant, "We will discuss this later," which in syndicate language translated to, "You have signed your death warrant." The eyes of the elders. Du-yun materialized at Jin's elbow, his voice low. "Boss, 3 of the 5 elders are here. Choy, Elder Song, and Elder Kang. They've been in the private room upstairs for the last hour. This isn't coincidence." "I know." Jin kept his expression neutral, his hand steady on Janet's lower back as he guided her through the crowd. "Stay close. Watch for anyone moving toward the exits or making calls." They made it halfway across the ballroom before the first interruption. A rival boss Jin had worked with on territory agreements, a man named H. Wang who ran gambling operations in Gangnam. "Jin SSI," H. Wang said with elaborate courtesy. "I wasn't aware you were bringing a guest this year." "Ms. Morrison is serving as cultural advisor for my mother's care," Jin replied smoothly. "Janet, this is H. Wang Ti-yong. He operates the Golden Dragon Entertainment District." Janet's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Entertainment, what a polite word for what you actually do." H. Wang's expression froze, and Jin felt every nearby conversation halt. No one spoke to syndicate bosses like that. No one acknowledged the reality beneath the euphemisms. It was professional suicide. "Janet speaks her mind," Jin said calmly. "I find it refreshing in a world of careful liars." H. Wang recovered quickly, laughing like it had been a joke. "Indeed, how unique." He excused himself rapidly, and Jin felt the shift in the room's energy. Janet had just made herself either the most dangerous woman present or the most doomed. The silent war begins. They continued through the crowd, and Jin made his introductions deliberately, each one a small declaration of war. Every boss, every lieutenant, every power broker who'd enabled the systems that destroyed Janet's life had to look her in the eye and acknowledge her existence. Some were polite, others barely concealed their contempt, but none of them could ignore her. "You're enjoying this," Janet murmured as they paused near a champagne fountain. "I'm documenting reactions," Jin corrected. "The men who can't meet your eyes are the ones profiting from operations like Beaks. The ones who stare too long are considering whether you're a threat worth eliminating, and the ones who try to charm you are looking for leverage." "Which category does your uncle fall into?" Jin glanced across the room to where Elder Choy was watching them with the patience of a snake. "All 3. A server approached with champagne, but Jin waved him off. Staying sober tonight wasn't optional. He scanned the room, counting exits, tracking the positions of Du-yun and the other loyalists he'd stationed throughout the venue. The security was tight, but not impenetrable, if the elders decided to move. "Jin Chanwook." The voice came from directly behind them, female and sharp. Jin turned to find Elder Song, the only woman on the council, regarding them with predatory interest. She was 73, had survived 4 different regime changes, and was rumored to have personally killed more people than Jin's entire generation combined. "Elder Song," Jin bowed respectfully, "you look well." "Save your flattery," her eyes fixed on Janet. "So this is the foreign woman causing such disruption to our organization. I expected someone more impressive." Janet met her gaze without flinching. "And I expected the woman who runs Seoul's prostitution networks to look more like a monster. But I suppose evil wears expensive perfume." The air itself seemed to stop moving. Jin felt Du-yun tense from across the room, saw hands moving toward concealed weapons. Elder Song's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried. "You have no idea what you're playing with, child." "I know exactly what I'm playing with," Janet replied quietly. "I taught your victims children. I know their names, their dreams, what they wanted to be before your operations destroyed their families." She leaned forward slightly. "So yes, Elder, I know precisely what I'm dealing with." Song studied Janet for a long moment, then turned to Jin. "Your father would be either very proud or very ashamed. I haven't decided which." "Neither have I," Jin admitted. Song walked away, and Jin realized his hands were shaking slightly. "You need to be more careful." "Why? So I can live longer in a world that's already killed me." Janet grabbed a champagne flute from a passing server. "I'm already a ghost, remember? The dead don't need to be careful." Before Jin could respond, the lights dimmed and a spotlight hit the stage at the far end of the ballroom. Elder Choy stood there in his traditional hanbok, his cane tapping once against the floor for attention. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Welcome, friends and colleagues," Choy began, his voice warm and utterly false. "Tonight we gather to celebrate another prosperous year, to honor tradition, family, and the bonds that make our community strong." Jin felt ice slide down his spine. This wasn't the planned opening speech. "But tonight," Choy continued, "we also address matters that threaten those bonds, disruptions to our way of life, sentimentality that weakens our foundation." His eyes found Jin across the crowd. "My nephew Jin Chanwook has brought us a guest tonight, a symbol he believes of progressive thinking, of mercy toward those outside our circle." Janet's hand found Jin's arm, her grip tight. "But I ask you all," Choy said, his voice rising, "when did mercy become more valuable than loyalty? When did the comfort of strangers supersede the security of family?" He began descending from the stage, moving through the parted crowd like Moses through water. "Jin SSI, would you join me? Bring your advisor." It wasn't a request. Jin felt every exit being subtly blocked by Choy's people, saw the trap closing with mechanical precision. He looked at Janet, saw fear flash across her face before she buried it under defiance. "Stay close," he whispered, "no matter what happens." They walked forward together, the crowd opening before them and closing behind, creating an arena. Choy waited at the center, his cane planted like a judge's gavel. "Tell us, nephew," Choy said when they reached him. "What exactly is Ms. Morrison's value to our organization? Beyond her service to your mother, what does she bring to this family?" Jin understood the question's true meaning. What are you willing to sacrifice for her? How far will you go? "She brings," Jin said clearly, "a reminder of what we've become, of the human cost we pretend doesn't exist because it's not profitable to acknowledge." He looked around the ballroom at faces he'd known his entire life. Beek Ho-jin trafficked 47 children through our loan networks, 47 families destroyed for profit margins, and every person in this room either knew and said nothing, or didn't want to know because ignorance was easier. The crowd erupted in murmurs, but Choy raised a hand for silence. Beek was one operator, one mistake. You would condemn an entire system for one man's excess. "I would condemn us all for enabling him," Jin replied. "For building an organization where that kind of excess is rewarded instead of punished." Choy smiled, and Jin knew he'd walked directly into the trap. "Then you're admitting our current leadership is flawed, that perhaps new direction is needed." Jin heard the click of weapons being drawn, subtle but unmistakable. Du-yun was moving toward them, but too slowly, blocked by bodies. The exits were sealed. And Elder Choy's cane was tapping against the floor again, that rhythmic sound that meant a decision had been made. "What I'm admitting," Jin said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins, "is that I'd rather die trying to be better than live maintaining what we are." "That," Choy said softly, "can be arranged." The blade emerged from the cane with a whisper of steel, catching the ballroom's chandelier light like captured lightning. And Janet, instead of stepping back to safety, moved forward to stand beside Jin. "If you kill him," she said quietly, "you'll have to kill me too. And then you'll have to explain to every family in this room why mercy is worth 2 murders on neutral ground." The ballroom held its breath, and Jin realized that the war he'd been preparing for had just begun. The blade stayed out for exactly 7 seconds before Elder Choy slid it back into the cane with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Dramatic as always, nephew. I was simply demonstrating a point." He looked around the ballroom at faces frozen in various stages of shock and calculation. "Tonight is about celebration, not conflict. Enjoy the evening, everyone. Jin SSI and I will continue this discussion in private later." The crowd exhaled collectively and conversations resumed, but Jin knew what he'd just witnessed. A public declaration, A line drawn. The elders weren't going to kill him at the gala. That would be too obvious, too messy. They'd wait until he was vulnerable, isolated from witnesses and neutral ground protections. Do-Yun appeared at his side the moment Choy walked away. "Boss, we need to leave. Now." "Agreed." Jin kept his hand on Janet's back, guiding her toward the exit through a crowd that suddenly seemed far more hostile than when they'd arrived. He felt eyes tracking their movement, saw hands moving to phones, recognized the coordinated surveillance of predators encircling prey. They made it to the car without incident, but Jin's instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. The security detail was too sparse, the usual guards replaced by faces he didn't recognize. "Do-Yun," Jin said quietly as they pulled away from the hotel. "Call the estate, check on my mother." Do-Yun dialed, and Jin watched his lieutenant's face go pale. "It's ringing, but no one's answering. Main house, security office, even the kitchen line." The security turns. Jin's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered and heard Elder Kang's gravelly voice. "Jin SSI, I hope you enjoyed the gala. While you were busy making speeches about morality, we've been securing your household. Your mother is safe, comfortable, and under proper supervision now. The foreign woman's belongings have been packed. I suggest you bring her to the airport and let this unfortunate chapter close quietly." The line went dead. Jin felt rage and terror warring in his chest. "Change of plans. We're going to the estate. Fast." "Boss, that's exactly what they want. Drive us into a controlled environment where—" "My mother is in that house." Do-Yun met his eyes in the rearview mirror and nodded. The car accelerated. Janet grabbed Jin's arm. "What's happening?" "The elders just took my home while we were performing at their staged distraction." Jin pulled out his phone and started making calls. The first 3 went to voicemail. The 4th was answered by a voice he didn't recognize. "The Chanwook estate is temporarily closed for security renovations," the voice said in flat, professional Korean. "Please call back tomorrow." Jin hung up and dialed the one person he trusted absolutely. "Haewon, it's Jin. Are you still inside?" Haewon was Minji's personal nurse, a woman who'd been with the family for 15 years. Her whispered response came through barely audible. "Sir, there are armed men in the house. At least 20. They came through the service entrance an hour ago and locked down every wing. They have your mother in her suite with guards posted outside. I'm hiding in the laundry room, but I can hear—" Her voice cut off abruptly. Jin heard scuffling, then Elder Song's voice came through the phone. "Jin SSI, your nurse is unharmed, merely detained, as is everyone loyal to you. Come home. Come alone. We'll discuss terms like civilized people. If you hurt my mother—" "Your mother is being given the medical attention she deserves, better than what that foreign woman was providing." Song's voice hardened. "You have 1 hour. Arrive alone, unarmed, ready to negotiate your transition out of leadership, or we start removing people from your household until you comply. The nurse first, then your mother's favorite maid, then, eventually, your mother herself when her continued existence becomes inconvenient." The line went dead. Janet was staring at him. "They're going to kill you the moment you walk in there." "Probably." "Then we call the police, the authorities, someone." Do-Yun laughed bitterly from the front seat. "Ms. Morrison, half the Seoul police force is on our payroll. The other half knows better than to interfere in syndicate business. There is no authority above this." "Then what do we do?" Jin looked at her, this woman who'd stood beside him at the gala when running would have been smarter, who'd faced down Elder Song without flinching. "We go in, but not the way they expect." The estate looked normal from the outside, lights warm in the windows, the gates open and welcoming. But Jin could see the subtle differences. Additional vehicles parked in the shadows, too many silhouettes in windows that should have been empty, the careful positioning of men who were trying to look casual but were actually establishing a perimeter. They parked a quarter-mile away, in the service area of a closed restaurant Jin's syndicate owned. Do-Yun pulled weapons from a hidden compartment, handguns, knives, two-way radios. Jin took a pistol and immediately checked the magazine, his movements automatic from years of training he'd hoped never to use against his own family. There's a service tunnel, Jin said, pulling up estate schematics on his phone. My father built it during the territorial wars in the 90s. Exit comes up in the wine cellar, which connects to the main house through the kitchen. They'll have it covered, Do-yeon said. Maybe, but it's our best option. Jin looked at Janet. You stay in the car if we're not back in 30 minutes. Absolutely not. Janet's voice was steel. Your mother knows me, trusts me. If she's confused, frightened, having an episode, I might be the only person who can reach her. This isn't a negotiation. You're not trained for. Neither was I trained to survive 3 years on Seoul's streets, but I managed. Janet held out her hand for a weapon. Give me something small I can conceal. Show me how to use it. Then let's go get your mother. Janet's hidden courage. Jin stared at her, seeing not the broken woman from the snow, but someone who'd been forged in fire he'd helped light. He handed her a compact pistol and spent 2 minutes showing her the basics: safety, trigger discipline, how to aim center mass. She absorbed it with the same focused intensity she'd probably used teaching poetry. The tunnel was exactly as Jin remembered, narrow and musty, the walls still bearing his father's mark, a small carved symbol every 10 meters to prevent disorientation in the dark. They moved in silence, Do-yeon on point, Jin in the middle, Janet at the rear trying to keep her breathing steady. The wine cellar entrance was unguarded, which immediately set off alarms in Jin's mind. Too easy. They emerged into the kitchen to find it empty, dishes still in the sink from dinner service, but no staff. The house was silent in a way that felt wrong, artificial. Do-yeon signaled. 3 guards east hallway armed. Jin nodded, and they moved through the servants' passages, the hidden arteries of the estate that allowed staff to move without being seen. These routes his father had also designed, paranoid about attacks from within. Jin had played in these walls as a child, knew every turn and dead end. They reached Minji's wing, and Jin heard his mother's voice, high and panicked. Where is my son? I want Jin. Why won't anyone bring me Jin? A man's voice, unfamiliar. Your son is busy, grandmother. Rest now. Don't call me grandmother. You're not family. Minji's voice cracked. Jin. Jin felt something snap inside his chest. He signaled to Do-yeon, I'm going in. Do-yeon grabbed his arm. Negative, too many guards. Jin pulled free and stepped into the hallway. 4 armed men stood outside his mother's door, all wearing the Choy family's colors. They saw him and raised weapons, but Jin's voice stopped them. I'm here as requested, alone, unarmed. He held up empty hands, the lie so smooth it felt true. Let me see my mother, then we can discuss whatever terms Elder Choy wants. The lead guard spoke into a radio, received a response, then nodded. She's been difficult. Maybe you can calm her. He opened the door. Minji's suite was in disarray, furniture overturned, her medical supplies scattered. And his mother stood in the center of it all, still wearing her nightgown, her hair wild, holding a broken picture frame like a weapon. But her eyes, when they found Jin, were sharp, focused, absolutely clear. Jin-ah, she said in Korean, her voice steady. I've been waiting for you. These men think I'm confused, but I know exactly what's happening. Your uncle is trying to steal what your father built, and I won't allow it. Minji's sudden clarity. Jin felt the world tilt. His mother's lucidity came and went like radio signals, unpredictable and brief. But right now, in this moment, she was completely present. She saw the guards, saw Jin, and understood everything. Iamione, Jin said carefully, are you hurt? I'm furious. Minji threw the picture frame at the nearest guard, who flinched. These idiots locked me in my own house, told me you'd abandoned me, as if I'd believe my son would ever. She stopped, her eyes going to the doorway where Janet had just appeared, emerging from the servants' passage. The guards spun, raising weapons, but Janet was faster. She had her small pistol out, aimed directly at the lead guard's center mass, her hands steady despite visible trembling. Nobody moves. There are 4 of us and 1 of you, the lead guard said. There are 2 of us, Do-yeon corrected, stepping from the shadows with his weapon trained. And if you know anything about me, you know I don't miss. Stand off, 4 guards with rifles against 2 pistols and whatever Jin was carrying in concealment. The mathematics were bad, but Jin saw the guards hesitating, doing their own calculations. This was supposed to be a clean transition of power, not a bloodbath in the matriarch's bedroom. "Lower your weapons," Jin said quietly. "You're following Elder Choy's orders, I understand. But ask yourselves, when my mother is lucid and explicitly saying this is wrong, who are you really serving? The family or a coup?" The lead guard's rifle wavered. "Elder Choy said the matriarch was too ill to make decisions, that we were protecting her from." "Does she look ill to you?" Janet demanded. "Does she look confused?" Minji stepped forward, and suddenly she was every inch the matriarch who'd survived 40 years in this world. "I am young Minji. I buried my husband with honor. I raised my son to lead with wisdom. And I am telling you now, anyone who points a weapon in my house without my permission is not family. They are invaders." The guards looked at each other. Jin saw the moment the lead guard made his decision. He lowered his rifle slightly, not a surrender but a de-escalation. "We need to call Elder Choy, get clarification." "Good," Jin said. "Call him. Tell him the matriarch is awake, aware, and asking for his immediate presence to explain this invasion." The guard reached for his radio, but before he could speak, the entire estate's lights cut out. Emergency backups kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in red. And through the sudden darkness came the sound of gunfire from the ground floor. Do-Yun's radio crackled. "Sir, we've got a problem. Unknown vehicles ramming the front gate. Multiple armed intruders engaging Elder Choy's forces. This isn't internal. Someone else is hitting the estate." Jin felt ice flood his veins. "Who?" "Can't tell yet. They're not wearing syndicate colors. Professional, military-grade equipment. They're asking for static. They're asking for the foreign woman by name. They want Janet Morrison." Janet's face went white. Jin looked at her, saw recognition and horror warring in her expression. "Janet, who knows you're here?" I can't." Her voice was shaking. "There's only one person who'd come for me like this, but he's supposed to be in prison. They told me he was serving 20 years. "Who?" Janet met his eyes, and Jin saw the fear he'd never witnessed before, not even in the snow, not even facing down Elder Song. "My ex-husband, Sarah's father. He blamed me for losing her, said he'd kill me if he ever got out." She gripped the pistol tighter. "His name is David Morrison, and he has friends in very bad places." The gunfire intensified. Somewhere on the grounds, someone screamed, and Jin realized that his war with the elders had just become the least of his problems. The gunfire was getting closer, systematic and professional, moving through the estate like a surgical strike team clearing rooms. Jin grabbed Janet's arm and pulled her toward the servants' passage, but she resisted. "Your mother will be safer with Do-Yun than caught in crossfire." Jin looked at his lieutenant. "Get her to the panic room in the basement. Full lockdown protocol. Don't open it for anyone except me." Do-Yun nodded and moved to Minji, who was clutching Janet's hand with surprising strength. "The girl stays with me," Minji said firmly, her clarity holding like a flame against wind. "She's family now." "Iamione, she's the one they're here for." "Then you protect her the way you'd protect me." Minji's eyes were fierce. "Your father would have already died for her by now. Don't shame his memory by doing less." The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present, and Jin saw his father's face, heard his voice. The measure of a man isn't who he'll kill for, it's who he'll die for. An explosion rocked the east wing, close enough to rattle the windows. The guards who'd been holding them at gunpoint made a collective decision. They ran toward the gunfire, choosing immediate threat over political loyalty. Smart soldiers surviving another day. Jin pulled Janet into the passage and they ran, Do-Yun guiding Minji behind them through darkness broken only by emergency lighting. The passage split at the library level, and Jin made a decision that felt both insane and inevitable. "Do-Yun, take my mother down. Seal the panic room. I'm taking Janet to the vault." "Boss, that's the opposite direction from safety." "The vault has the only exterior exit that isn't being actively assaulted. It's also where every piece of evidence about the trafficking network is stored. Jin met his friend's eyes. If we're going to die tonight, I'm making sure those records burn first. Du-yun understood immediately. You're not planning to survive this. I'm planning to make it count. They separated at the junction, and Jin led Janet downstairs that descended into the estate's foundation, the old bones of his father's paranoia made concrete and steel. Behind them, the sounds of combat intensified, automatic weapons fire, shouting in English and Korean, the distinctive crack of flashbangs clearing rooms. How did he find me? Janet was breathing hard, trying to keep pace. David's been in federal prison. They said he got 20 years for arms trafficking. Men like that don't stay in prison unless someone wants them there. Jin typed the access code for the vault, his fingers remembering the sequence his father had taught him at age 12. And if he has military-grade backup, someone wanted him out. The vault door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing the temperature-controlled room where Jin kept the physical records that could destroy his organization. He moved immediately to the far wall, pulling down file boxes with labels dating back 7 years. The trafficking records, the debt ledgers, the falsified documents that had ruined hundreds of lives. Fire in the snow. Janet stared at the boxes. You kept all of it. My father taught me to never destroy evidence, that it was insurance against betrayal, leverage against enemies. Jin started stacking boxes in the center of the room. He never considered that the worst betrayal would be what we became willingly. Above them, something heavy crashed through a floor. Closer now. They had minutes at best. Jin pulled the main ledger from its fireproof case, the one containing every debt the syndicate had ever collected, and opened it to Janet's page. Her name, her fabricated debt, the notation about Sarah being marketable collateral. He looked at her face as she read it, saw the moment she understood the full scope of what had been done to her. This is in your handwriting, she whispered, pointing to an approval signature. You signed off on this. On Beek's quarterly report, I never read the details, just approved the revenue numbers. Jin's voice was hollow. That's not an excuse, that's just what happened. Janet's hands were shaking. You approved the operation that stole my daughter. Yes. And now you want credit for burning it, for destroying evidence that could put you all in prison. I don't want credit. Jin pulled a lighter from his pocket, his father's old Zippo with the family crest engraved on the side. I want to stop it from happening to anyone else, even if I don't survive to see it. The end of an empire. Janet grabbed his wrist before he could light the first box. Wait, if you burn these records, those 47 children can't be identified. Their families can't be found. Sarah's case becomes your word against the system. Jin felt the truth of that land like a punch. He'd been so focused on destroying evidence of his guilt that he hadn't considered it was also the only map to redemption. Then, what do I do? You give them to someone who can use them, someone outside your world. Janet's eyes were fierce. You said you had digital copies on the flash drive. Burn the physical ledgers that implicate you, but the trafficking records, those go to authorities who aren't bought. There are no authorities who aren't bought. Then we find journalists, international human rights organizations, someone who can't be silenced. Janet released his wrist. You want to actually change something? Then stop thinking like a criminal trying to cover tracks and start thinking like someone who wants justice. The vault door alarm shrieked. Someone was trying to breach from above. Jin heard footsteps, multiple people moving with tactical precision. He had seconds to decide. He separated the trafficking records from the debt ledgers, shoved the trafficking boxes toward Janet. There's an emergency exit behind the wine racks. Leads to a service tunnel that comes up 3 blocks away. Take these. Run. Get them to someone who matters. What about you? Jin piled the debt ledgers, including the one with Janet's name, in the center of the room and flicked the Zippo open. I'm going to make sure no one else's daughter ends up as collateral. Who is the real boss? The door breached as Jin lit the first ledger, flames catching on decades of documented cruelty. Janet was already moving toward the exit, struggling with the heavy boxes. Jin turned to face whoever was coming through the door and found himself staring at a man who looked like Janet. Same bone structure, same eyes, but twisted by rage and prison time into something dangerous. David Morrison stepped into the vault, followed by 4 armed men in tactical gear. "Hello, wife. Been looking everywhere for you." Janet froze at the wine racks, still holding the trafficking records. "And you must be the Korean gangster who's been playing house with my family." David's smile was broken glass. "Appreciate you gathering all the evidence in one convenient location. My employers will be very interested in these records. Lot of powerful people who'd pay to make sure certain trafficking networks stay buried." Jin understood immediately. David wasn't here for revenge. He was here for leverage, for the same evidence Jin had been about to destroy. Someone had sent him to secure the records before they could be exposed. "The elders," Jin said quietly. "They arranged your release. Elder Choy sends his regards, said you'd probably do something stupid and sentimental, and he was right." David gestured to his men. "Kill the gangster, bring the woman and the boxes." The tactical team raised weapons, and Jin calculated odds that were mathematically impossible. 4 professional soldiers against 1 man with a pistol. The fire spreading behind him limited his movement. Janet was caught between exits, holding evidence that could save dozens of children, but also condemn her to whatever David had planned. Jin had spent 15 years learning to win through superior force and careful planning. But standing in a burning vault with his father's lighter still warm in his hand, he realized that sometimes winning meant something different. He dropped his pistol and raised his hands. "I surrender. Take me. Let Janet go with the boxes." David laughed. "You think you're negotiating. You've got nothing I want except dead." "I've got everything you want," Jin countered. "I'm Jin Chanwook. My signature is on half the criminal networks in Seoul. You kill me now, you get nothing. But you take me alive, you have leverage against every organization in this city. I'm worth millions as a hostage." The tactical team leader spoke into his radio, received a response, nodded to David. "Choy confirms, says bring the nephew alive if possible. He wants to handle the execution personally." David's face twisted with disappointment, but he gestured to his men. "Secure him, and get that fire out before it spreads to anything useful." As they zip-tied Jin's wrists, he caught Janet's eyes. She was still holding the boxes, tears streaming down her face, understanding exactly what he'd just done. Traded his life for hers, for the evidence, for a chance that something might actually change. Duyun's voice crackled through Jin's dropped radio. "Boss, I've got your mother secure. Elder Choy just arrived with reinforcements. He's asking for static. He's asking for you and Janet both. Says if you don't surrender in 5 minutes, he starts executing household staff." David picked up the radio and responded. "Tell Elder Choy that I've got his nephew secured and ready for transport. The foreign woman and the evidence boxes are in custody. Operation successful." "And the files," Choy's voice came through, sharp with concern. David looked at the fire still burning in the center of the vault, consuming the debt ledgers that included Janet's name and thousands of others. "Some minor damage, but most records are intact." It was a lie. The debt ledgers were ash, but the trafficking records were safe in Janet's arms, and David either didn't know the difference or didn't care. "Bring everything to the main house," Choy ordered. "It's time to end this family drama permanently." They hauled Jin to his feet and pushed him toward the exit. He looked back at Janet one last time and saw her mouth 2 words. "Thank you." Then she disappeared into the tunnel with the boxes, and Jin was being dragged upstairs into whatever execution his uncle had planned. The estate's main hall was a war zone, bodies from both sides scattered across marble floors, artwork destroyed by stray bullets, the chandelier his mother loved shattered into crystal fragments. Elder Choy stood at the center of it all, still wearing his gala hanbok, his cane planted like a conqueror's flag. "Nephew," he said warmly, as if they were meeting for tea. "I'm disappointed. You could have accepted a quiet retirement, lived comfortably on family money. Instead you chose this woman, this moral crisis, this theatrical gesture." Jin said nothing, calculating distances, counting exits, looking for any advantage. "Where is she?" Choy asked David. "The foreign woman." "Escaped through the emergency tunnel with some file boxes. My men are tracking her now." Choy's expression didn't change, but his knuckles went white on the cane. "Those boxes contain property of this organization. Recover them. Kill the woman if necessary." "No," Jin said. "I'm sorry," Choy turned to him. "I said no." Jin met his uncle's eyes. "You want to execute me for defying the elders, for trying to dismantle your profitable trafficking operation, for choosing conscience over legacy. Fine. I accept that. But Janet Morrison and those records walk free, or I promise you my death will be the beginning of something you can't control. You're in zip ties surrounded by armed men. You promise nothing." "I promise that Do-Yun has standing orders to release every digital file I've compiled to every law enforcement agency, news organization, and rival syndicate in Asia if I don't check in every 6 hours, including full documentation of elder involvement in child trafficking networks, including your personal authorization codes and offshore account details." Jin smiled without humor. "Kill me, and you don't just lose a nephew. You lose the empire, all of it. Every carefully built layer of protection burns." The lie was so massive, so audacious, that Jin saw doubt flicker across his uncle's face. Do-Yun had no such orders, no such files, but Choy didn't know that, couldn't risk it. The cane tapped once, twice, 3 times. "Nephew," Choy said slowly, "you're bluffing. You would never destroy the family legacy your father built." "My father," Jin replied, "would have burned it all down the moment he learned about the first trafficked child. And you know it. That's why you had to wait until he was dead to expand into these operations, because Di-Young would have killed you himself." Choi's face went blank, and Jin knew he'd hit truth. The old man's cane rose slightly, the blade beginning to emerge, and Jin prepared to die on the same marble floor where his father had taught him to walk. But before Choy could strike, Minji's voice cut through the hall like a blade of its own. "Brother." Everyone turned. Minji stood at the top of the grand staircase, supported by Do-Yun, still in her nightgown but radiating the authority of 40 years as this family's matriarch. Her clarity was holding, sharp and undeniable. "You dare," she said softly. "Draw a blade in my house against my son." Choy lowered the cane slightly. "Sister, you're unwell. You don't understand what's happening." "I understand perfectly." Minji descended the stairs slowly, each step measured. "My son tried to stop a trafficking operation. You tried to kill him for it. Which of us is unwell?" The hall was silent except for the crackle of distant fires. And Jin watched his mother, lucid, powerful, absolutely certain, walk up to her brother-in-law and slap him across the face with enough force to echo. "This empire dies tonight," Minji said. "One way or another. Either Jin reforms it into something we can live with, or I burn it myself and salt the earth." She looked around at the assembled guards, the elders' forces, the witnesses to this family's collapse. "Choose now. Who is the real boss of this house?" Minji's slap echoed through the ruined hall for exactly 3 seconds before Elder Choi's hand moved to his cane. But Do-Yun was faster, his pistol already trained on the old man's center mass. "Touch that blade and die, Elder. The matriarch has spoken." The standoff held like a held breath. 20 armed men, 2 elders, 1 lucid matriarch in a nightgown, and Jin bound in zip ties calculating how to survive the next 60 seconds. Then Minji did something that broke the entire tableau. She laughed. Not the confused giggle of dementia or the polite sound of social obligation. A real laugh, sharp and bitter and absolutely clear. "Look at you all. My husband's empire reduced to men pointing guns at an old woman in her own home. Di-Young would have killed every one of you for this disrespect." She turned to Choy. "You think I don't remember? You think the fog in my mind erases 40 years of watching you maneuver?" She tapped her temple. "I forget what I ate for breakfast. I forget my son's age sometimes. But I remember the look on your face at my husband's funeral. Satisfaction, like you'd finally been released from a leash." Choi's expression was stone. "Sister, your grief is speaking." "My clarity is speaking." Minji's voice cut like wire. "And it won't last long, so listen carefully. You have 1 hour to remove yourself and your forces from this estate. Take Elder Song, Elder Kang, anyone who supports this coup. Leave my son alive and unbind him. In exchange, I won't call in the favor I'm owed by the Minister of Justice." Jin felt the temperature in the room drop. His mother was calling in political leverage he'd never known existed. "What favor?" Choy asked carefully. "The one where I didn't tell his wife about their daughter. The one where I have photographs, dates, hotel records going back 12 years. Minji smiled without warmth. "Di-young kept insurance on everyone. I'm simply choosing to use it." The gold hairpin. The standoff shifted. Choi's men were looking at each other, doing new calculations. Their boss had just been outmaneuvered by a woman with Alzheimer's, and everyone in the room knew it. Jin watched his uncle's face cycle through rage, calculation, and finally cold acceptance. "You'll regret this, sister." "I've regretted many things. This won't make the list." Minji gestured dismissively. "Now leave, before I remember other favors I'm owed." Choy tapped his cane once, a sound that usually preceded violence but this time preceded retreat. His men lowered weapons, began moving toward exits. David Morrison and his tactical team hesitated, clearly waiting for different orders. "You too," Minji said to David. "Take your prison-bought freedom and whatever the elders promised you and get out of my house." "My wife is not your wife anymore. She divorced you 3 years ago in absentia after you tried to kill her in county lockup." Minji's voice was ice. "Yes, I know everything tonight. It's exhausting and won't last, so move faster." David looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Minji's expression stopped him. He signaled his team and they withdrew, following the elders' forces toward the damaged gates. Within 5 minutes, the estate was emptying, leaving only Du-yun's loyal guards and the household staff emerging cautiously from hiding. Du-yun cut Jin's zip ties, and Jin immediately went to his mother, who was swaying slightly on her feet. "Iyamioni, you need to sit." "I need to find that girl." Minji's clarity was already flickering, her eyes losing focus slightly. "Janet, where is Janet? Is she safe?" "She escaped through the tunnel with the evidence. She should be..." Jin's radio crackled. He answered to hear Janet's voice, breathless and scared. "Jin, I'm 3 blocks away with the boxes, but David's men are tracking me. I can hear them behind me. I don't know where to go." Jin gave her an address, a safe house his father had maintained, unknown to the elders. "Get there, lock yourself in, I'm coming." "Your mother will understand." Jin looked at Minji, saw her nodding even as the fog crept back into her expression. "Go, get the girl, bring her back to me." Jin ran. Through the ruined estate, past bodies being carried out by Du-yun's men, past damaged artwork and shattered windows, out into the December night where snow was beginning to fall again. He took Du-yun's car and drove like the city was ending, running red lights and weaving through traffic until he reached the safe house. Janet was in the basement, surrounded by the file boxes, her pistol trained on the door when Jin entered. She lowered it when she recognized him, and he saw she'd been crying. "I thought they'd kill you." "My mother had other plans." Jin helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "Terrified, exhausted, furious." Janet gestured at the boxes. "But I have everything. Every child's name, every falsified document, every transaction. It's all here. Then we finish this. We find a journalist, a prosecutor, someone with enough protection that the elders can't touch them. We expose it all." Janet stared at him. "You understand what that means. You'll be confessing to crimes that will put you in prison for life." "I know." "Your empire collapses, your family's legacy destroyed." "Good," Jin met her eyes. "It should have collapsed years ago." They loaded the boxes into the car and drove back through falling snow, and Jin felt something like peace settling over him. Not absolution, he'd never earned that, but purpose, direction, a path forward that didn't require burying his conscience. The estate was quiet when they returned, damage being assessed, bodies being removed, order being restored. Du-yun met them at the door with a grim expression. "Boss, your mother, she's asking for you both," but he hesitated. "The Clarity's fatting, you need to hurry." They found Minji in her suite, sitting by the window watching snow fall on the grounds. She looked up when they entered, and Jin saw the fog thick in her eyes now, the lucidity burning out like a candle in wind. "Jinna," she said softly, "is that you?" "Yes, Yamione, I'm here." Jin knelt beside her chair, "and I brought Janet." Minji's gaze shifted to Janet, and for a moment something sparked, a flash of recognition and clarity. "The girl from the snow, the one who saved me." "Yes, grandmother." Minji reached up and began removing something from her hair, a gold hairpin, antique and beautiful, carved with traditional patterns Jin recognized from his childhood. His father had given it to her on their wedding day, and she'd worn it every day since, even through the dementia's worst episodes. "My daughter." She held it out to Janet with trembling hands. "This was my mother's, and her mother's before that, 4 generations of women who survived impossible things." Her voice was fatting, words slurring slightly as the clarity slipped away. "You're one of us now, a survivor, a fighter." Janet's hands shook as she accepted the hairpin. "Grandmother, I can't. This is too precious." "You're too precious." Minji's smile was gentle, distant. "You used your body to shield me from the cold. That kind of mercy, that kind of courage, it doesn't come from comfort. It comes from knowing what suffering is and choosing kindness anyway." She looked at Jin, and he saw the fog closing in completely now, saw his mother disappearing back into the disease's grip. "Jinna, you'll take care of her. And the little girl, Sarah." "Yes, Yamione." "Good, that's good." Minji's eyes were unfocused now, searching the room for something that wasn't there. "Is Di-young coming home soon? He said he'd be back for dinner." Jin felt his throat close. "Soon, Yamione. He'll be home soon." The final clear word. Minji nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the window. Jin watched her slip away into memory and confusion, the brief window of clarity closing completely. Janet was crying silently, clutching the gold hairpin like it was made of light instead of metal. Do-yeon appeared at the door. "Boss, we've got incoming. 4 police vehicles, lights off." Approaching from the south. "They're not responding to the shooting. This is something else." Jin stood, feeling exhaustion pull at him. "How much time?" 5 minutes, maybe less." Jin looked at Janet, at the hairpin in her hands, at the boxes of evidence that could destroy everything. He'd spent 15 years building an empire on blood and fear. Now he had 5 minutes to decide if he'd let it all burn or try to salvage something from the ashes. "Call them," Jin said to Do-yeon. "Tell them Jin Chanwook is ready to make a full statement about trafficking operations in Seoul. Tell them I'm offering complete cooperation in exchange for immunity for household staff and protection for 2 witnesses." "Boss, if you confess." "Then I confess. Set it up." Do-yeon nodded and left. Janet stood, still holding the hairpin, looking at Jin like she was seeing him for the first time. "You're really going to do this? Destroy everything you've built?" "I'm going to try to build something better on the ruins." Jin gestured to the boxes. "Those 47 children deserve more than my guilt. They deserve justice." "And Sarah?" "We'll get her back. Legal, clean, permanent." Jin allowed himself a small smile. "My mother just gave you a family heirloom. In our world, that makes you untouchable. No elder, no rival, no one can threaten you without declaring war on the entire Chanwook line." Janet looked down at the hairpin, then carefully placed it in her hair, securing it the way Minji had taught her during their quiet afternoons together. "I don't want to be untouchable. I just want my daughter back." "Then let's make that happen." The police arrived exactly when Do-yeon predicted. Jin met them at the door, hands visible, unarmed, ready to confess everything. The lead detective was a woman named Inspector Han, someone Jin's organization had never managed to bribe or intimidate. She looked at the ruined estate, at Jin's bruised face, at Janet standing behind him holding file boxes, and her expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Jin, I understand you have information about trafficking operations." "I have everything," Jin replied. Names, dates, financial records, victim documentation going back 7 years, all of it. In exchange, I need witness protection for Janet Morrison and expedited custody for her daughter, Sarah. And I need immunity for my household staff. They had no knowledge of these operations. Inspector hand-studied him for a long moment. And what about immunity for you? I don't want it. I'm responsible for what happened, directly or indirectly. I'll accept whatever sentence the court decides. Behind him, Jin heard his mother's voice, confused and distant. Jin-ah, why are there so many people? Is it someone's birthday? He turned to see Minji standing in the doorway, looking lost and frightened, all trace of her earlier clarity gone. Janet immediately went to her, guiding her back inside with gentle hands, whispering comfort in a mixture of English and Korean. My daughter, Minji said, touching Janet's face. When did you get home? I was worried. Jin watched Janet's face transform, saw her choose in that moment to be whoever Minji needed, to step into the role his mother's broken mind had created. I'm home now, grandmother. Everything's fine. Inspector Han cleared her throat. Mr. Jin, we need to take your statement, and we'll need to secure that evidence. Of course. Jin looked back at Janet one more time, saw her holding his mother while wearing the gold hairpin that meant family, that meant belonging, that meant someone had finally chosen her as worth protecting. Just give me 1 minute. He crossed to them, knelt beside his mother's chair. Iamione, I have to go away for a while, but Janet will stay with you. She'll take care of you. Minji looked at him with eyes that didn't quite recognize his face but still held love. You're a good boy, so like your father. She patted his cheek. Come back soon. I'll try. He stood, nodded to Janet and walked back to Inspector Han. I'm ready. As they led him to the police car, Jin looked back at the estate one final time. His empire was burning, his family scattered, his future uncertain. But through the window, he could see Janet holding his mother, the gold hairpin catching light like a promise. And for the first time in 15 years, Jin Chanwook felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope. The Seoul family court building smelled like institutional coffee and bureaucratic despair. Janet sat on a hard plastic chair, clutching the gold hairpin in her pocket like a talisman, while lawyers argued jurisdictional details she barely understood. Across the room, a social worker held a file with Sarah's name on it, and Janet's entire world had narrowed to that manila folder and the door her daughter would walk through any minute. Ms. Morrison, the judge said in careful English, given the evidence presented by the prosecution regarding your fraudulent debt case and the testimony provided by Mr. Jin Chanwook, this court finds that your daughter Sarah was illegally separated from your custody through criminal enterprise. We hereby restore full parental rights effective immediately. The daughter returns. The door opened. Sarah walked in holding a social worker's hand, 9 years old now, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit and an expression that looked like she'd stopped trusting adults 3 years ago. She saw Janet and froze, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been hope before fear locked it down. Sarah, Janet whispered, standing on legs that barely supported her. Baby, it's me. Sarah's voice was small, suspicious. You left. I didn't leave. I was fighting to get back to you, every single day. Janet knelt, making herself smaller, less threatening. I never stopped looking for you. The lady at the home said you didn't want me anymore. Janet felt rage and grief war in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. That lady lied. I wanted you every second. Her voice cracked. I just couldn't find you. Sarah took one step forward, then another, testing, waiting for the adult to prove themselves false the way they all eventually did. But Janet stayed on her knees, stayed open, stayed present until Sarah was close enough to touch. The girl reached out and touched Janet's face like confirming she was real, and then she broke, launching herself into her mother's arms with a sob that sounded like it had been trapped for 3 years. Janet held her daughter and cried into her hair while lawyers shuffled papers, and the judge quietly directed everyone to give them space. And through the window, she could see the car where Do-yeon waited, ready to drive them to the estate that was slowly transforming into something new. Jin had been in custody for 11 months, awaiting trial on charges ranging from racketeering to accessory to trafficking. But his confession had broken open investigations into 6 major syndicates, recovered 32 of the 47 children from Beek's operation, and exposed corruption networks that reached into government, law enforcement, and Seoul's wealthiest families. The elders had scattered like rats. Elder Choy found dead in Busan from what police called a probable suicide that everyone knew was revenge from families he'd destroyed. And the estate, the massive compound that had housed 3 generations of criminals, was being converted into something Minji had designed during one of her final clear moments before the dementia consumed her completely. A sanctuary for the displaced, for the ones Seoul had discarded. A new name. The sign at the gate read Minji House in Korean and English, honoring the matriarch who'd lived there for 40 years and who now barely recognized the walls she'd helped build. Janet pulled up with Sarah, her daughter clutching her hand tight, taking in the transformed estate with wide eyes. "This is where we live now," Sarah asked in Korean, her English rusty from years in the system. "This is home," Janet confirmed, answering in the same language. "And there are other kids here, kids who have been through hard things like you. You're not alone anymore." They walked through the gates, and Jin's vision became reality. The East Wing had been converted into family apartments for displaced women and children. The West Wing held classrooms where Janet taught literature, and other volunteers taught everything from basic literacy to job skills. The main house remained Minji's residence, but she was cared for by a rotating staff of residents who'd learned that helping others helped them heal. Do-yeon met them at the entrance, no longer a syndicate lieutenant but the sanctuary's head of security, protecting people instead of criminal operations. "Welcome home, Ms. Morrison, and you must be Sarah." He knelt to her level. "Your mom's told me a lot about you." Sarah hid behind Janet's legs, still not trusting men, and Do-yeon understood immediately, gave her space. "There's a girl your age in Unit 3. Her name is Hana. She likes to draw. Maybe you'd like to meet her later." Sarah nodded slightly, and Janet felt something loosen in her chest. This might actually work. Her daughter might actually heal here. The warmth of the memory fought the bite of the present, but for the first time in 4 years, the present was winning. Janet showed Sarah their apartment, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, windows that overlooked the garden where residents grew vegetables and flowers. It wasn't the life Janet had planned, wasn't the teaching career she'd built, but it was real and solid and theirs. That evening, after Sarah fell asleep clutching a stuffed rabbit Do-yeon had given her, Janet went to visit Minji. The matriarch sat by her usual window, watching snow fall on the grounds exactly like she had a year ago when everything had burned and been reborn. "Grandmother," Janet said softly, "my daughter came home today." Minji turned, her eyes distant but gentle. "That's wonderful, dear. I had a daughter once, or maybe a son. I can't remember anymore." "You have a son, Jin. He's away right now, but he's coming back." "Jin," Minji repeated, tasting the name like something half-remembered. "Is he a good boy?" "He's trying to be." Janet sat beside her, and together they watched the snow, 2 women who'd survived impossible things, building something gentle from the ruins. The snowy stairs, 1 year later. Jin's trial concluded on a gray February morning with a sentence that surprised no one and shocked everyone. 7 years in minimum security, with credit for time served and testimony cooperation. The prosecution had wanted 20. The defense had argued for probation. The judge had split the difference and added a mandate. Upon release, Jin would serve 5 years of supervised community service at Minji House, continuing the work he'd started. Janet was there when they brought him back to the estate in civilian clothes, no longer a syndicate boss but an ex-convict with a purpose. He stood at the bottom of the stairs where he'd first found her and his mother, and for a moment, time collapsed. Snow was falling again. The stairs were slick with ice, but this time, no one was dying in the cold. Jin looked up and saw Janet at the top of the stairs, wearing the gold hairpin, Sarah holding her hand, and his mother visible through the window behind them. His entire world contained in one frame. "Are you happy?" Minji had asked him once, a lifetime ago, before dementia had stolen her questions along with her memories. Jin climbed the stairs slowly, each step measured, and when he reached the top, he looked at Janet and finally had an answer. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I'm not empty anymore, that's something." Sarah studied him with the wariness of a child who'd learned adults were dangerous. "Are you the man who helped my mom find me?" "I'm the man who tried to make up for losing you." Jin knelt to her level, the way Dooyeon had taught him, making himself smaller and less threatening. "I can't change what happened, but I can make sure it never happens to anyone else." Sarah considered this, then looked at her mother for confirmation. Janet nodded slightly, and Sarah made a decision that looked like it cost her something. "Okay, you can stay." Jin felt the permission land like grace, unearned and freely given. He stood and followed them inside, past residents who knew his history and had chosen to let him prove he could be more than his worst acts. The sanctuary was chaos in the best way. Children running through halls that had once echoed with violence, women laughing in a kitchen where deals had been made over blood money, life blooming in spaces designed for death. Jin moved through it like a ghost learning to be human, helping with dinner prep, teaching a coding class to teenagers who'd aged out of foster care, sitting with Minji while she told him stories about his father that she'd already told him 3 times that day. That night, after the residents had gone to their apartments and the building settled into quiet, Janet found him on the back terrace where he'd once made calls ordering violence with the casualness of someone ordering lunch. "Sarah's asleep," she said, standing beside him. "First night she hasn't had nightmares in months." "Good, that's good." They stood in silence, watching snow cover the grounds, and Janet realized she'd stopped hatting him somewhere between the trial testimony and watching him teach a teenage girl with a trafficking history how to code her first website. He'd never be redeemed. That wasn't how trauma worked, wasn't how justice functioned. But he was trying, genuinely and without performance, to build something that mattered. "Your mother asked about you today," Janet said. "Didn't remember your name, but she knew she was supposed to be waiting for someone important." "Did you tell her?" "I told her the person she loves is exactly where he needs to be, doing exactly what he should be doing." Jin turned to look at her, and Janet saw exhaustion and purpose warring in his expression. "Do you still hate me?" "Sometimes," Janet admitted. "When I remember Sarah's face when they took her, when I think about the 3 years I lost, when I see kids here who were damaged by organizations you enabled." She paused. "But I also see what you're building, and I see that you're not asking for forgiveness, just permission to make it slightly less terrible." "Is that enough?" "I don't know. Ask me in another year." Jin nodded, accepting the uncertainty. They stood together as snow fell, 2 people building a fragile peace from the wreckage of a war neither had wanted, but both had survived. Inside, through the window, Minji moved past in her nightgown, being gently guided back to bed by a resident who'd lost her own mother to violence. The gold hairpin glinted in Janet's hair. Sarah's stuffed rabbit sat on the terrace railing, forgotten in the afternoon's play. And somewhere in Seoul, another displaced family was being connected to Minji House, another chance at rebuilding, another small rebellion against the world's insistence that broken things stay broken. "Are you happy?" Janet asked, throwing his mother's question back at him. Jin thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. "I'm useful. I'm trying to be better than I was. I can sleep at night knowing today's choices weren't built on someone else's suffering." He looked at her. "That's not happiness yet, but it's the foundation. Maybe happiness comes later." "Maybe," Janet agreed. A child's voice called from inside. Sarah, looking for her mother, still learning that disappearance didn't mean abandonment anymore. Janet touched Jin's shoulder once, briefly, a gesture that wasn't forgiveness but wasn't condemnation either, and went to answer her daughter's call. Jin stayed on the terrace, watching snow cover the stairs where everything had changed, and allowed himself something he'd denied for 15 years. Hope that tomorrow could be different. That redemption wasn't a destination but a direction. That a man who'd built an empire on suffering could spend the rest of his life building something else. The snow fell. The sanctuary slept. And Jin Chanwook, former syndicate boss, current ex-convict, future uncertain, finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him all along. That the measure of a man isn't the empire he builds or the enemies he defeats. It's who he protects when protection costs him everything.